Okay, so this is the last lecture in the Roman Empire course, and I just want to give you a brief introduction to Emperor Justinian and Byzantium, which is the name of the leftovers of the Roman Empire in the East. And it was named, Byzantium was named after um, a city that was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Constantinople. And before Constantine named that the city of Constantine, it was called Byzantium. So we call the later empire, the later Roman Empire, Byzantium. Okay, so Emperor Justinian. So he's has a really interesting history. Um, and I've given you the dates here when he ruled, 527 to 565. And we've got some pretty amazing mosaics, which are these little blocks of tile that are cemented in and then make these beautiful pictures. We have quite a few images of Emperor Justinian. Now, he has a really interesting story because what you're looking at here is the map of the Eastern Roman Empire. And you can see sort of where the boundaries are for this. And of course, the last time we talked about the fall of the entire Roman West to all of these invading people, or the people who were, in some cases, escaping the Huns. So if you remember, we've got the Vandals being in control of Africa. You've got the Visigoths being in control of Spain. You've got the Franks in France and Germany. And then we talked about the last Roman emperor being taken over by the Ostrogoths. So this is what it looked like before Emperor Justinian. Now, what Justinian wanted to do is to bring back the glory of the Roman Empire by trying to capture again the West. And you're looking at a map of 565, and what Emperor Justinian ended up doing is sending out one of his great generals, Belisarius, to recapture the West. So let me just go, let me see if I can move backwards. Looks like I can't move backwards on this slide. But you'll remember that Italy was taken by Ostrogoths and North Africa by the Vandals. What Justinian ended up doing is having Belisarius invade North Africa first, and it fell amazingly quickly. So the Visigoths were not prepared for an invasion. And so what he ended up doing is saying, hey, since you're there, just invade Italy. So that's what he ended up doing. And, they ended up going into Spain, taking a little bit of Spain over. And so you can see where Justinian was trying to go with this. If everything had held stable, there's no doubt he would have pushed into the Franks and then gone all the way back, because that's what he was planning on doing. Now, um, unfortunately for Justinian, probably fortunately for those kingdoms that were already there, he did not get his wish. And then soon after this all collapsed, and the whole Eastern Empire fell back into the map, this size of the map I showed you. Now, one thing that's happening also during this period is that you've got the rise of the Muslims. So what we're going to talk about is, and if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how the Persians and the Romans were continually fighting from, the first century BC, maybe even a little bit earlier than that, all the way up through this period, and they are still fighting. So pretty serious battles are going on. So I just want to talk about how the Muslims actually came to power, and the whole process of that. We're not going to spend very much time. I'm going to make this a fairly short lecture. So I'm sure everyone has heard of Muhammad. I've given you his dates here. We're not going to talk about his whole entire history, but he has all of these religious visions. And I wanted to give you these dates here. You can see he dies in 632. In 622, you've got a Roman emperor named Heraclius, and he begins this religious war with Khosroes II, who is the Persian king. So towards the end of the life of Muhammad, you still have the Romans and the Persians fighting. Now, in this case, the Persians are not Muslims. They are their own, they have their own religion and so on. Um, Now, what you've got here, and I don't want you to memorize this, it's a very long list of dates. And what this is the battles between the Persians and the Romans. So not the Muslims, but the Persians. You've got Persia invading Roman territory again, and this happens on and off for centuries, where they took a whole bunch of Roman territory. So they took the very wealthy city of Antioch and Damascus, sacked Jerusalem, and in 614 they take Egypt from the Romans. And then under Emperor Heraclius, the Roman emperor, he builds up his army and then he invades into Persian territory and starts taking all of this back. So he captures Armenia and part of Asia Minor. We know he captures Jerusalem. We're not exactly sure of the year that he does this. And then in 628, there's this big battle where Heraclius defeats Khosroes II. Um, and part of a little bit of history I didn't tell you is that when Khosroes II went in and captured Jerusalem in 614, he had taken part of what they considered to be the true cross, or the cross that Christ was crucified on. And in 630, the Romans have this back and they return the cross to Jerusalem. So what I'm really trying to get across is that you can see in this very short period of time, 606 to 630, you've got the Romans and the Persians battling back and forth, and they're taking each other's territories, and it's returning back to them, and so on. And this leads to certainly the downfall of the Persians, and it also leads to the Romans having a huge amount of their territory taken away for, in some cases, forever. So you've got the rise of the Muslims. Now, they just happen to rise just at the time when Rome and Persia were sort of exhausted from fighting. So in 634, the Muslims invade Syria and they take Damascus. So Damascus is one of the cities, that had been Persian, then it had been Roman, and then it had been Persian, and then Roman again. So the Muslims came in and took this. 636, the Byzantine army, or the Roman army, tried to take it back and they couldn't. And then, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but you can see all these very famous cities are taken by the Muslims. And in 642, they take Egypt as well, and it never goes back to Roman territory. And we've talked about how important Egypt was to the Romans in terms of being an extremely wealthy area, especially for agriculture. In 642, you finally have the Persians defeated. So there is no Persian Empire after this period because the Muslims come in and make it their own territory. Now, 659, you finally have a peace treaty between the Romans and the Muslims. It doesn't last very long because the Muslims and the Romans started breaking their treaties, and the Muslims attempt to take Constantinople, which was the Roman capital at this point. And then what you've got here on this map shows you some of the Byzantine Empire, and then you've got the Arab Caliphate taking this massive territory up and down the Arab Peninsula. You've got Egypt being taken. You've got North Africa being taken. In 711, a very easy date to remember, they will invade Spain and take over parts of Spain. We're not going to go into this class, but this just shows you how big the Muslim invasion was. And again, it's happening right at the time when you've got the Persians and the Romans exhausted from all of their fighting. And then Constantinople is here. So that's the capital. And you can see how close it is to more of these invading people that are coming from Central Asia. Okay, this is the last slide I have. So the Eastern Roman Empire actually survived despite all of the fighting that happens with the Muslims, and this will continue for a very long time. We're not going to go into the Crusades in this course, but that's part of this history as well. Now, we talked a little bit about this after the fall of the West. So Greek becomes the official language because that's the language they spoke in the East. There is no Latin West anymore, and Latin quickly dies out. You do find a lot of the titles dropping out as well, and the title of king being reserved for the emperor in a large number of cases. Now, it is interesting that the Romans, or the Byzantium, people living in the Byzantians living in Byzantium, they consider themselves to be Roman. And sometimes you have to be careful in their primary text. They actually call themselves Romans, but I mean, technically they're part of the Roman Empire, but they're not part of the West. And the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, lasted until 1453. So if you remember way back at the beginning course, we talked about some of the extreme early history of the Romans, with the, traditional dates of the founding of Rome going back to, 700 BC within that time frame. The Romans actually lasted until 1453, when you have the Ottoman Turks taking over Constantinople. So there's a lot of really interesting history that unfortunately we can't cover in this class, and maybe at some point we'll be able to create a course on the history of Byzantium.